The Cold War was an age of paranoia, secrecy, and looming nuclear dread. But from that tension, filmmakers crafted comedies that turned fear into farce. These weren't just movies, they were cultural pressure valves, daring to laugh at espionage's deadliest stakes. But which spy comedies from the Cold War not only survived, but aged into cult classics? Let's uncover the dozen that did. Our Man Flint, 1966. When Our Man Flint premiered, it was hailed as America's cheeky answer to James Bond. Audiences loved Derek Flint, played by James Coburn, a secret agent so stylish, so effortlessly cool, he made even 007 look uptight. Critics dismissed it as spoof, but over time, its self-awareness and satirical bite cemented it as a Cold War cult classic. Behind the scenes, the film leaned heavily into parodying spy tropes, megalomaniac villains, absurd gadgets, and exotic locations. But what set it apart was Coburn's performance tongue firmly in cheek, yet charismatic enough to make the audience secretly root for him. Unlike Bond's brooding danger, Flint was playfully invincible, reflecting America's own swagger during the mid-60 seconds. The movie also cleverly mirrored cultural anxieties. The villain's plot to control global weather tapped into real Cold War fears of scientific dominance. And in an era of escalating space race ambitions, it slyly mocked the idea that nations could literally control the heavens. Though initially overshadowed by Bond, Our Man Flint thrived in late-night TV reruns where younger generations discovered its playful irreverence. Today, it stands not only as a cult comedy but as a time capsule of mid-1960 seconds bravado, where Cold War fear could be laughed at through oversized gadgets and winking bravado. It endures because it reminds us that sometimes the best way to confront global dread is with a sly grin and a gadget-laden lighter. The President's Analyst, 1967. At first glance, The President's Analyst seemed like a wacky satire. James Coburn again, this time as a psychiatrist recruited to counsel the U.S. president. But soon, the film spiraled into a paranoid comedy masterpiece, lampooning spies, corporations, and the government alike. Released during the height of Cold War suspicion, it was seen as too radical by some critics, too ahead of its time by others. The story follows Dr. Sidney Schaefer, as he realizes that everyone from foreign agents to domestic corporations wants access to his confidential sessions. The satire goes deeper than slapstick. It skewers America's obsession with surveillance, foreshadowing debates that wouldn't fully bloom until decades later. Behind the camera, director Theodore J. Flicker clashed with studio executives who feared the film's political bite. Paramount reportedly buried its release in some markets, worried it mocked institutions too openly. Yet, audiences who found it loved its boldness. The ultimate villain isn't Russia or China, but the phone company, an eerie jab at corporate power that feels startlingly modern. Initially dismissed, the movie became a cult treasure among college audiences in the 1,970 seconds, especially as Watergate and wiretapping scandals made its satire feel prophetic. Today, it resonates as one of the rare comedies that dared to mock both sides of the Cold War, proving that truth, no matter how bitter, is sometimes best delivered with a laugh. Its legacy reminds us that paranoia can be hilarious until it turns real. Casino Royale, 1967. Not to be confused with Daniel Craig's brooding 2006 Bond reboot, the original Casino Royale was a psychedelic parody that baffled critics and charmed counterculture audiences. With an ensemble cast including David Niven, Peter Sellers, and Orson Welles, the film was a chaotic spoof of the James Bond mythos itself. Upon release, critics panned it for its incoherence. 5 directors worked on different segments, creating a kaleidoscope of clashing tones. Yet that chaos became part of its charm. For 1,967 audiences weary of straight-faced espionage tales, Casino Royale felt like a counterculture explosion, surreal, funny, and defiantly messy. Behind the scenes, egos clashed. Sellers reportedly feuded with Wells so bitterly they filmed their scenes separately. The set was a circus of rewrites, rewiring, and last-minute improvisation. But the result was a film that looked like no other, a spy spoof as wild as the psychedelic era that birthed it. Over time, Casino Royale found its following, especially among late-night audiences who reveled in its colorful absurdity. Its Burt Bacharach score and the timeless ballad The Look of Love gave it unexpected staying power. What began as a disaster aged into a cult classic, a reminder that sometimes the most memorable films are born out of beautiful chaos. It survives as proof that even the slick world of espionage can collapse into glorious, kaleidoscopic nonsense. Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, 1964. When Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove premiered, it shocked audiences with its audacity, a comedy about nuclear annihilation. At the time, critics marveled at its daring, while some politicians condemned it as un-American. But it wasn't just satire, it was a razor-sharp dissection of Cold War paranoia, making it one of the most enduring black comedies in cinema. Peter Sellers carried the film with his tour-de-force performance, embodying three characters: the meek president, the bumbling RAF officer, and the bizarre Dr. Strangelove himself. Each role showcased the absurdity of Cold War leaders trying to control forces far beyond their reach. Behind the scenes, Sellers struggled with the physical demands, injuring himself and nearly missing key shoots. Kubrick, ever the perfectionist, coaxed brilliance from chaos. What made the movie unforgettable was its brutal honesty. The doomsday machine, designed to prevent war, instead ensures global annihilation. The famous war room scenes mocked the childish bravado of men playing games with nuclear fire. Even the final montage, scored ironically to We'll Meet Again, left audiences disturbed and laughing simultaneously. Though divisive in 1964, the film's reputation only grew. Its cult following spans generations, especially among students and political junkies who see its satire as eternally relevant. In truth, Dr. Strangelove is less a comedy and more a mirror, reflecting humanity's dangerous tendency to find absurdity in its own destruction. Its legacy proves that sometimes the only way to process unspeakable dread is to laugh through clenched teeth. Hopscotch, 1980. Arriving late in the Cold War, Hopscotch starred Walter Matthau as a rogue CIA agent who defies his superiors by writing a tell-all memoir. On release, critics called it a breezy, charming espionage comedy, though it didn't cause much box office fuss. Over time, however, it became beloved for its wit and Matthau's sardonic charm. Unlike other spy comedies of the era, Hopscotch wasn't about gadgets or villains. Instead, it skewered bureaucracy and control. Matthau's Miles Kendig gleefully outsmarts both the CIA and the KGB, mailing chapters of his book worldwide, daring them to catch him. Behind the camera, director Ronald Neame crafted a cat-and-mouse game that was less about explosions and more about wit. The production leaned heavily on Matthau's improvisational timing. His chemistry with co-star Glenda Jackson gave the film a playful edge, contrasting the usual dour espionage tropes. Critics admired its light touch, calling it a satire of institutional paranoia wrapped in a romantic comedy's pacing. Though overlooked in its day, Hopscotch became a cult gem in the video rental era. Audiences weary of grim spy thrillers found solace in its playful mockery of bureaucratic absurdities. Today, it feels almost prophetic, a comedy about whistleblowing and leaks made decades before such ideas became front-page news. It survives as a testament that sometimes the bravest act of defiance is laughing in the face of authority. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. 1966. Norman Jewison's The Russians Are Coming. The Russians Are Coming was a surprise hit upon release, both a comedy and a message of peace in the midst of Cold War tensions. Critics praised its daring humor, while others saw it as dangerously soft on America's enemy. But the film's heart and its comedy made it unforgettable. The plot is simple but brilliant. A Soviet submarine accidentally runs aground off a small New England island, sparking chaos among the townspeople. What follows is a cascade of misunderstandings, slapstick encounters, and eventually, human connection between enemy soldiers and American locals. Alan Arkin's breakout performance as a weary Soviet sailor brought nuance and warmth to what could have been a cardboard caricature. Behind the scenes, the studio worried the film would be seen as unpatriotic. After all, it asked audiences to laugh with Russians at a time when propaganda demanded suspicion. Yet, its release coincided with a brief thaw in U.S.-Soviet relations, and audiences embraced its humor. The film's legacy rests on its message that laughter could bridge divides where politics could not. It went on to earn 4 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, cementing its place in cinematic history. In the decades since, it has aged into a cult classic, beloved for its mix of farce and humanity. It reminds us that even at the height of hostility, comedy could prove stronger than fear. Top Secret, 1984. When Top Secret premiered, critics were divided. Some called it juvenile nonsense, others hailed it as comedic genius. Made by the team behind Airplane, the film was a Cold War parody masquerading as an Elvis-style musical, starring a young Val Kilmer in his first feature role. At the time, it baffled audiences, but decades later, it became a cult classic. The movie gleefully mashed together spy tropes with rock and roll absurdity. Kilmer plays an American rock star caught in a spy plot against East German forces. Sight gags, slapstick, and outrageous set pieces dominated the screen. One scene was shot entirely backward, another featured a cow in boots. It was fearless in its nonsense. Behind the scenes, Kilmer threw himself into the role, even singing his own songs. The Zucker-Abrahams-Zucker trio took inspiration from both Cold War thrillers and Elvis musicals, creating a hybrid so bizarre that it alienated mainstream critics. Yet, the film found its audience over time. VHS rentals and late-night screenings turned it into a beloved oddity, celebrated for jokes that never stopped coming, even if half didn't land. What truly sets Top Secret apart is its irreverence. In an era of serious Cold War dramas, it treated espionage like a playground for absurdity. Today, cinephiles cherish it not just for nostalgia, but for its daring blend of parody, slapstick, and musical comedy. It endures because, in mocking the Cold War, it also reminded us not to take fear too seriously. In Like Flint, 1967, a sequel to Our Man Flint, In Like Flint initially struggled to live up to its predecessor's hype. Critics called it overblown, even silly. But fans of James Coburn's super spy Derek Flint eventually embraced it as a cult continuation of the saga. Over time, its quirks, once considered flaws, became part of its charm. The film dialed everything up: bigger gadgets, more outlandish villains, and heightened satire. This time, Flint battles a cabal of women bent on world domination, a storyline that critics now debate for its mix of satire and outdated gender politics. But in the 1,960 seconds, it struck nerves, both comedic and controversial. Behind the scenes, Coburn relished his role, leaning harder into parody than in the first film. The sets were more extravagant, the gadgets even sillier, and the tone more self-aware. Though some felt it lacked the freshness of Our Man Flint, the sequel carved its own niche in spy spoof history. In retrospect, In Like Flint reflects America's shifting anxieties of the late 60 seconds. The feminist undertones, though handled clumsily, show how cultural change was colliding with cinematic fantasy. For modern audiences, that mix of satire and outdated humor only adds to its camp appeal. It survives as a relic of excess, a cult favorite because it dared to push parody beyond reason. Spies Like Us, 1985. Released during the final decade of the Cold War, Spies Like Us starred Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd as hapless CIA recruits sent on a mission doomed to fail. Critics at the time gave it lukewarm reviews, calling it uneven, but audiences turned it into a box office hit. Over the years, it aged into a cult comedy with a loyal following. The plot follows two bumbling men more interested in shortcuts than espionage who accidentally stumble into averting nuclear war. The comedy comes less from gadgets and more from the characters' ineptitude. Director John Landis leaned heavily on slapstick and buddy comedy chemistry, with Chase's dry sarcasm bouncing off Aykroyd's earnest eccentricity. Behind the scenes, the production was peppered with cameos from comedy greats and even musicians like B.B. King. Landis, fresh off successes like Trading Places, envisioned it as both parody and adventure, though studio meddling trimmed some sharper satirical edges. Still, the film struck a nerve with audiences weary of Cold War dread. They were ready to laugh at spies who were just as clueless as anyone else. Though overshadowed by other 1,980 seconds comedies, Spies Like Us endured through cable TV and VHS, becoming a cult staple. Its mix of parody, buddy humor, and Cold War absurdity made it timeless in its own disorganized way. It endures because it shows us that sometimes saving the world is just dumb luck wrapped in laughter. The Mouse That Roared, 1959. When The Mouse That Roared arrived, critics hailed it as a clever farce, though it took years to find its true cult following. Starring Peter Sellers in multiple roles, the film tells of a tiny European nation that declares war on the United States, hoping to lose quickly and receive aid. Instead, they accidentally win. The satire was biting. Released at the dawn of the nuclear age, it lampooned the absurdity of superpower politics by showing how even a powerless country could outwit giants. Sellers, playing everything from the prime minister to a bumbling field marshal, showcased his unmatched versatility. His comedic timing was impeccable, elevating the film from a mere farce to a sly commentary on Cold War economics and diplomacy. Behind the scenes, the production faced skepticism. Columbia Pictures worried the satire might alienate American audiences during a tense period. Yet, its dry British wit found fans on both sides of the Atlantic. Over time, university screenings and television reruns turned it into a cult gem, celebrated for daring to mock the very foundations of nuclear deterrence. It survives because it dared to show that sometimes the smallest voice can laugh the loudest at global absurdities. Red Heat, 1985, East German comedy. Unlike most titles on this list, Red Heat wasn't an American production. It came from East Germany's DEFA Studios. Released during the mid-80 seconds, it offered a rare satirical look at espionage from the Eastern Bloc's perspective. While little known in the West at the time, it later gained cult status among cinephiles fascinated by Cold War cinema. The plot follows a pair of bumbling East German agents assigned to infiltrate the West. Instead of showcasing socialist heroism, the film gently mocked bureaucracy, incompetence, and paranoia. To East German audiences, the humor was a quiet rebellion, laughter in a state not known for encouraging it. Behind the scenes, the filmmakers walked a tightrope. Satire in East Germany had to be subtle, lest it draw censorship. Scripts were vetted, and jokes had to walk the line between playful and politically acceptable. Yet, the film slipped through, offering a sly, comic take on the spy genre that resonated deeply with domestic viewers. Only after the Berlin Wall fell did Red Heat travel widely, where it was rediscovered as a cult artifact of Eastern satire. Today, it stands as proof that even in the most rigid systems, humor found a way to flourish. It remains unforgettable because it laughed where laughter wasn't supposed to exist. OSS 117, Cairo, Nest of Spies, 2006, retro throwback. Though released decades after the Cold War, OSS 117, Cairo Nest of Spies is a loving throwback that parodies 1,960-second spy films so perfectly it earned a place among cult Cold War comedies. French comedian Jean Dujardin starred as Hubert Bonacieux de la Barthe, France's answer to Bond, only far more clueless and politically incorrect. The film intentionally embraced outdated attitudes of the 50 seconds and 60 seconds, turning sexism, colonial arrogance, and Cold War paranoia into the punchline. Critics praised its precision in capturing the look and feel of the era, from costumes and sets to jazzy spy music. What could have been mere parody became a brilliant homage, skewering the past while reveling in its style. Behind the scenes, director Michel Hazanavicius meticulously studied classic spy films to reproduce their aesthetic. Dujardin leaned into his role with pitch-perfect obliviousness, delivering lines with the confidence of a man too clueless to realize he's the joke. While some audiences were divided on whether it was too politically incorrect, cult cinephiles embraced it as both parody and critique. By the time it reached international audiences, it had already become a cult sensation in France. And with its sequel, OSS 117, Lost in Rio, it solidified its legacy as a retro-modern spy spoof phenomenon. It endures because it reminds us that nostalgia can be hilarious, especially when it exposes the flaws of the past. From nuclear paranoia to absurd gadgets, from bumbling agents to psychedelic chaos, Cold War spy comedies gave audiences permission to laugh when fear ruled the world. They aged into cult classics not because they solved history's tensions, but because they mocked them. Which is your favorite? Comment, like, and subscribe for more cinematic deep dives.